Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be reacting to
What Americans don't understand about Europe.
What is it about Americans and Paris, or Americans and Tuscany, or most recently, apparently, Americans and Mallorca? Many Americans have long romanticized Europe as this jewel of ancient history and culture.
Americans in Mallorca, Spain.
But what even is Europe? What do people mean when they talk about it? Where is Poland? What about the Balkans? What about Turkey? Is that still Europe? And the question on everyone's lips, where does Russia fit into this? Isn't Russia also part of Europe as well? I'm originally from the UK. I've been living in Germany for over a decade, and these are some of the questions that I want to explore today. Because if you ask 10 Americans to point to Central Europe on a map, you'll get 10 different answers. Most Americans, actually, I would say most people in general, like their mental map of Europe, at least people who are not from Europe themselves, it stops at France, Germany, and maybe Spain. Beyond that, it's just all this kind of vague blur of the East or Slavic or somewhere near Ukraine. And woe is the man who makes the mistake of calling a country Eastern Europe. Everyone seems to want to distance themselves from that label because it's not just a comment on the geography. It's a kind of code for less developed, ex-communist, and many countries want out of that category. Poland sees itself as Central Europe, so does Hungary, Austria, and even parts of Germany. But where does Central Europe end, and where do the Balkans begin? And why does nobody seem to agree? I guess the real question here is how many Europes are there? It sounds simple enough, but it really isn't. If you ask a geographer, they'll tell you Europe stretches from Iceland in the west to the Ural Mountains in Russia. That's kind of the textbook definition. It's a subcontinent defined by tectonic plates and mountain ranges. But if you ask a politician, they'll probably say something.
understanding Europe like in a geographic sense, or like
I think just overall, like, and geography, political, social, sociological, whatever, like how people are. I think overall, because I think there is an idea when Americans think of Europe, Europeans they think of more like the French, like the British, the Germans maybe. I don't think Italians. I don't think they when you say, oh, you're a European, someone like from Czechia comes to mind, or from Poland. I think for Americans, I don't think that's who they would think. I think it would be those major countries that we see like in the movies and whatnot.
it goes vice versa, because here, like the opposite, I would say they only know like California, New York, Miami.
I absolutely, I do think it's also fair if you ask European like about American, they would either think like that redneck, the Alabama, Missouri, American, Texas.
And the rest is country.
Yeah, or they would think of that New Yorker or the Californian. I don't think they would necessarily think of someone from Boston, someone from Virginia, someone from Florida, Miami, Florida, someone from Vegas, I think, or Seattle. There is definitely stereotypes. So I think that's what he's kind of gonna go with, like about how Americans perceive Europeans through stereotypes. But let's see.
About the EU, meaning the 27 countries with shared laws, open borders, and Brussels breathing down their neck. But then that excludes countries like Norway and Switzerland and Albania, and yes, even parts of the Balkans that desperately want into the EU. Now, if you ask somebody from the UK, depending on their age, of course, you might hear something like fog in the channel, or Europe is over there somewhere. Like, quite honestly, this video is much for Brits as it is for Americans, because many Brits do not see themselves as being part of Europe at all. And if you don't understand this, I did a whole video on it here. You can check it out after this one up here. I'll link it somewhere.
Maybe we'll check it out. That's interesting. I did not know that.
So which one is it? Geographical Europe is seemingly clear on paper. Political Europe is in flux.
Because British is like a second America. Like they're the closest to Americans in terms of Europe.
I would say, yeah, they're more closer to Americans than anybody else. That definitely I agree with.
And cultural Europe is completely up for debate. And that's even before we get to emotional Europe. The one people imagine when they dream of sitting in a Parisian cafe, or eating Sachertorte in Vienna, or hiking the Alps, or sailing the Croatian coast. The one Hollywood romanticized for decades, and that just doesn't really actually exist. There's no single definition of Europe. There really are quite a few, and some of them overlap. Some contradict each other, and the confusion isn't just semantic. It shapes how nations see themselves and how others see them. And this is why countries like Georgia and Moldova and the Ukraine, they desperately want to be seen as European. And the complexity is increased by the sheer number of languages spoken here and the absence of any official common language across Europe.
That's a long ass intro he's doing. 3 minutes on the 16 minute, we're still in the intro, I feel like.
Learning German has been one of the most eye-opening experiences of my life, which is why I'm very excited to bring you Lingopie, who are kindly sponsoring this audio, where just actually using dark or clicking the perfect way to gain exposure to the language of common is, including the link in the slide. So, who belongs where? What is Western, Central, and Eastern Europe? This is where things really start to unravel. Like most Americans, quite frankly, most Brits, they will refer to everything east of Germany as Eastern Europe, like Poland,
Swiffer Power Mop has hundreds of strips.
Eastern Hungary, Eastern Romania, Bulgaria, and the Baltics, definitely Eastern Europe. Except they're not. I mean, at least not according to the people who actually live there. Ask a Pole or a Czech or a Slovak where they live, and they will probably say Central Europe. And this is not just a geographic correction.
Well, I can't speak for those people, but Lithuania, yes, you ask me, it's Eastern Europe. I don't know what we... Yeah.
I guess we went from west to east and there's no central.
For me, if I was to say Central Europe, I would say Germany.
Germany central?
Yeah, I would say Germany, Central Europe. Czechia, Slovakia, I would say those are Central. Austria, Central Europe. The countries around that region. Poland is kind of... Poland's an interesting country because I would almost split Poland in half and say half is in Eastern Europe, half is in Central Europe. Because it is so big.
We did that with Turkey.
Yeah, because Poland is so big, it's kind of... I feel like you can't really include it in Central Europe, the whole country, because it is a lot on the east side, but at the same time, it's not all on the... Poland is like, I think, if you... Yeah, I think if you call Poland Central Europe or Eastern Europe, I think it's either way, like, it can be either. Yeah, but that's how I would...
Here in the States, what's the cutoff for central?
Well, here we have Midwest, so that's like the central. What's the cutoff? I think Midwest starts with west of Tennessee and east of honestly east of like the Nevada, Arizonas. I think that's the Midwest. That's how I would describe it.
It's a cultural statement, you know, it's a way of saying we're not post-Soviet, we're not Balkan, we're not some eastern outpost of Europe.
But
we're
while
at its
I don't
very
think you
heart.
have
And this
to
matters.
divide it into equal parts. I just think that it's just, I don't know, maybe there is a reason how they do the division, like how we do the time zones. So I wonder if that's in consideration.
Actually, Poland is in Central European time zone. So Poland
they're
should be central. Poland should be central, yes. Lithuania is in east. It's in another time zone than Poland. By that logic, Poland shouldn't be considered Eastern. They should be considered Central Europe. So yeah, I think honestly, I think that's a great thing you bring up. I think the East versus Central then should be the time zones.
Yeah, it's something we can agree
Yeah,
on
I think that's how we should draw. Yeah, I think so.
Mm.
and accounted for.
It's because, you know, these labels, Western, Eastern, and Central, are never neutral. They always come with baggage. Western Europe has long been synonymous with prosperity, with liberal democracy, and modernity. And Eastern Europe still evokes the ideals of communism. It is just a fact that these countries...
But I think kind of the counter argument is that basically the whole Europe is one time zone. Like Poland is the same time zone as Spain, I believe. So it's like, you know,
Well, I don't know. I'm just wondering-
that's the counter argument.
I'm just wondering if we were to put it into parts, like what would be like the more scientific approach to how we divide? Because right now it's like what people feel like. I feel like I'm East. I feel like I'm West.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's
feel
put a little
different.
wrench.
Even
in our
just walking
plan.
around the city of Berlin, you can often feel the difference between West and former East Berlin, even though so much has changed since then. Central Europe tries to sidestep both stereotypes by reclaiming its medieval and Austro-Hungarian legacy, a legacy that predates the Cold War and often complicates the East-West binary even more. So what about the Balkans? Good luck getting a clear answer there. So geographically, the Balkans refer to the southeastern peninsula, countries like Serbia, Bosnia, Albania, and Bulgaria. But culturally and politically, it's a minefield. Like the term the Balkans was originally used by the Ottomans, which is the Turkish word for mountain, specifically like a chain of wooded mountains, and it was never really used by the locals themselves. And so for many in the West, the term Balkan often implies conflict, instability, ethnic tension, largely due because of the wars in the 90s. And so many people in the region, they really resent this label. Identity there is really complex, and not least of all because the borders have shifted so often. Like this is one of the things that...
Why is the bottom of his video like dark?
makes comparing the US to Europe, as in US states, the European countries.
Yeah, like you see that kind
Oh
of tint
yeah.
of the
And
bottom.
maybe they ripped this from someplace. I don't know.
It looks like like looks like a damaged footage or something. Like back in the day, you put magnet on a cassette. That's what it would look like.
Totally meaningless because it's just such a different situation. And then there is, of course, the question of Russia and Turkey. And this is not even about Americans or Brits anymore. No one can seem to come to a consensus on this. If you ask 10 Europeans if Russia is part of Europe, then you will probably get 10 different answers, each tinged with history, ideology, and their own kind of trauma. You just can't get a yes or no answer. It always requires context and story. Like geographically, the answer is kind of a simple yes. But then again, not really, because only part of Russia, not the whole of it, is part of Europe. Only around 25% of Russia's landmass lies west of the Ural Mountains, which traditionally marks the boundary between Europe and Asia. And that portion includes cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. These are cities which culturally have played a huge role in European history. But politically and psychologically, the question is really anything but simple. You know, for much of modern history, Russia has been Europe's great contradiction. A civilization that gave the West Tolstoy, Tchaikovsky, and Dostoevsky, while simultaneously terrifying it with tsars, gulags, and tanks. Russia has always occupied a liminal space. It's too vast, too authoritarian, and just too other to be fully European, yet too historically intertwined to be excluded. And so even in the post-Soviet years, its position remained ambiguous. Then came Crimea and the Donbass, and suddenly for much of the West, the question wasn't, is Russia part of Europe, but
Watch now. Wake up.
should it be? Today, many Europeans, especially those in the Baltics, Poland, and the Nordics, they reject any notion of a shared European identity with Russia. The war in Ukraine didn't just redraw borders, it redrew Europe's moral map, and Russia, for many, now sits decisively outside of it. And then there's Turkey, another borderland nation caught between East and West, culturally rich, militarily strong, and historically enmeshed with Europe through the Ottoman Empire. And Turkey has a long
Okay, never mind.
flirted with the idea of European belonging. It's even been a formal candidate for EU membership since 1999, still not been accepted, because as with Russia, the question is never just about geography, it's about values. It's about democracy, press freedom, human rights, and whether Turkey's political direction aligns with the EU's evolving identity. And so this is really the crux. Europe is not a neutral geographic concept. It's a story we tell about ourselves. And like all stories, it includes and excludes based on who's doing the telling. And so just to boil this down, I would say there are at least 3 different Europes, and most people kind of mix them up without realizing it, and that's why there's so much confusion. So there is geographical Europe, political Europe, and cultural Europe. So on paper, Europe is a continent, but it's a strange continent, more like a peninsula than a landmass attached to Asia and sharing the vast Eurasian land plate. And that's why definitions vary. Some exclude the Caucasus nations like Georgia and Armenia, others debate whether Cyprus, closer to Syria and Greece, should even count, and even the UK, like post-Brexit, is often spoken of as if it just drifted off into the North Atlantic. So geography alone is just not enough
I
to
also
explain
feel
Europe.
like it's like, countries don't want to include other countries in the identity of, oh, they're part of this version of Europe.
Yeah, I think there's an identity issue, yeah, because like Russia, first of all, the wars, as he said, but also the religion is different.
Yeah.
Turkey also, being Muslim, it's not really Europe is not really Muslim, so that also plays a part.
Because it comes with pride too. What makes like a Central European, Eastern European,
Right.
and a Western European, we kind of have what they are based on what is generally accepted, but it doesn't hold true in all cases.
Not enough. You have to then go into political Europe, which is very confusing. There's the EU, which is the most ambitious political project the world has ever seen, but being in Europe doesn't mean being in the EU. Norway, Switzerland, and Iceland are not EU members, but they are unequivocally European, both in identity and alignment. Meanwhile, you have countries like Turkey and several Balkan states. They have been EU candidates for decades, but they still haven't crossed the threshold into the EU. Then you've got NATO, a separate alliance with its own geography. Turkey is in NATO, but not in the EU. Austria is in the EU, but not in NATO. Finland and Sweden recently joined. Ukraine wants to join. Russia is doing everything to prevent that from happening. So the politics get really very messy very quickly, and political Europe is very different to geographical Europe. And finally, there's cultural Europe. Perhaps this is the hardest to define and the most emotionally charged. This is the Europe of Beethoven and Dante, of liberal democracy and secular values, of Christmas markets and university towns and high-speed trains. It's the imagined community that tourists dream of and politicians invoke. But it's also where the deepest tensions lie. Everyone talks about the US as being this amazing melting pot of multicultural immigration, which you know, it's not false, but what about the cultural and political entity of Europe? Like, nothing like that has ever been tried in the history of the world. Like, the idea that you can just look past years and years of war and destruction and shifting borders, like, that actually goes against human nature, and that is what makes it so special. The problem is, who gets to define European values? Is it the bureaucrats in Brussels? Is it the Catholic heartlands of Poland, or is it the post-national elites in Paris and Berlin? When Hungary or Italy moves to restrict migration, are they defending Europe or are they betraying it? Is Europe Christian? Is it secular? Is it multicultural, postmodern? No one really agrees. But at least for the moment, this is a battle of ideas, not bodies. And that was kind of the whole point of the EU. So if you are American, like, don't worry, you're not alone in finding Europe very confusing. It is just very difficult to define. And everything we've discussed here just makes it so elusive. Like, it's not a single civilization, but a palimpsest, like layer upon layer of contradiction. You know, you've got Catholic and Protestant, Latin and Slavic, liberal and authoritarian. It's a place where boundaries have shifted so often that some villagers have changed countries several times without ever moving. And yet there is something distinctly European in the very awareness of these contradictions, like the ability to hold multiple identities in tension. The very idea that you can go supranational is very European. Like, no one else has even conceived of trying to attempt
But
this.
you
Like,
know,
with all
that's
this-
wild because then there's a notion in Europe they're not like proud of like who they are. Like there's not like a sense of like what do you call it? Maybe like nationalism, but
I
like
think Europeans are very proud of it.
yeah, they're very,
Yeah,
very,
they're very
proud.
proud, yeah.
Because to get to this point where you want to define these things, give definition to these things is like part of human nature.
Yeah, I think Europeans are proud.
to see what happens if it actually works. But like, to sit in a cafe in Paris and critique the entire system in 5 languages with 3 passports in your back pocket, that
I guess maybe more like on the eastern side of Europe, they're more proud. Like, I don't know necessarily, I can't speak for like the French, the Spanish, the Germans, the countries that were never like really occupied, that had to fight for their freedom, not never, but like in the recent past century, let's say. I think those countries might not have the same pride that the countries that have to fight. Like we see in Croatia, they had to fight. They're very proud. Lithuanians are very proud of their, So I think those countries that have been occupied and had to fight for it, I think they are proud. The other countries, I don't know, because we do see like Europeans look down upon Americans, how patriotic Americans are. Oh my God, how can you be? So
Yeah.
I think it's more those Western Europeans
Yeah,
that
it's
never
more from
had
the
to
West,
fight, for their country. So they don't have that identity.
is the very essence. The very idea of Europe is, and I think always has been, a debate. Like, that's what makes it so frustrating to outsiders and fascinates those who stay, because it's really alive and it's changing all the time. And so why does any of this matter, especially to someone from Austin or Alberta or Manchester? Why does this matter? Because the story of Europe is still the story of the West. It was European thinkers who exported ideas like rationalism, nationalism, capitalism. It was European wars that shaped the current world order that we have today. And it's European integration that set the template for post-war peace, and European disintegration that signals its potential unraveling. And so when Europe struggles with its identity, it reveals cracks in the broader Western psyche. And so Europe is often the first place where cultural tremors are felt. The rise of the far right, the backlash against globalism, the decline of religion, the loneliness epidemic, the bureaucratic bloat, these are not just European stories, they are canaries in the coal mine of modern liberal democracies. What happens in Sweden's elections, in Poland's courts, or on the French streets during a pension protest ripples far beyond the borders of Europe. And so, I have a tendency to go a little too deep with these topics. But if you're American, this might seem like overthinking. But in Europe, identity is largely inherited. It's not chosen. Like, we don't really have anything like the American dream. And whether you believe that the American dream is dead or alive, but the fact that that idea exists is incredible. And so if you really want to understand Europe...
I feel like it was super, super broad. And even though you say he's overthinking, I never felt like we got into it.
Yeah, I feel like
we got to stay on the surface.
Yeah, I felt like there was a lot of rambling, beating around the bush, but we didn't really answer the question. Because what Americans don't understand about Europe, okay, so I get Europe is complex and it's not like a monolith. It's cool, but you can say the same thing about any continent,
Yeah,
though.
this will change
Like-
the things that we're
Yeah, what
comparing
Europeans think is
Americans
about Americans is the same exact thing. What Europeans don't understand about Americans would be the same exact thing. And like, I see, based on your comments, when we do these videos, that you don't really understand it. I'm not like trying to throw shade. I didn't really understand it until I came here, because it's just not it's America is not a monolith. America is even more complex than Europe is in terms of, because Europe consists mostly white. Maybe nowadays it's a little different with all the refugees. I haven't lived in Europe in a long time. When I was growing up, it was mostly white, kind of similar looking people. There was no, it just, here it's people come from all over the world. In Europe, if they do come, like some people come from Africa, sure, but some from Middle East, sure, but that's about it. You will rarely see someone, from Brazil, someone from Peru, someone from Indonesia. They're there, but very small population. Here, it's like literally from every country, and so it's very similar issue that he's talking about.
Like, I wouldn't call like those parts, like you would say, like immigrants go to in Europe, like a melting pot per se, because we have like a particular pocket where they're coming from. So you have an influx, and they're coming high population.
Right.
Whereas here, it's like very truly diverse.
Yeah, so it's just there's a lot like Europeans don't understand about the States, the same way a lot of Americans don't understand about Europe. I think it's just we don't understand because we haven't been exposed to it, and that's normal. I don't think
We
it's,
don't live that life.
yeah, we don't live. I don't think it's wrong or bad. I just think you can educate yourself on that if you want to, but if you don't want to, I don't think that's bad either. Like if you have your own life, you have the stuff you deal with, you have your priorities, you don't necessarily need to understand what's going on in America if you live in Europe. Like, why do you care? Like, you don't have to
I feel
understand
like
that.
even Europe doesn't understand. Europeans don't even understand Europe.
But as he said, yeah, British don't understand Europe. So it's like you don't really have to. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why like a lot of Americans don't understand Europe because they don't need to
Can I see the
and they don't
comments?
care
Yeah.
enough. The Czech lands were part of Austro-Hungarian Empire. Before that, the Holy Roman Empire for 1,000 years. Prague was the capital of the HRE for more than 100 years. Genetically, we're closest to the Slovaks, Poles, Austrians, and Germans, especially Bavarians. Why do so many people assume that 40 years of communism can undo a millennium of sheer history?
I don't know. Some people people making the rules.
Yeah.
We
Saying Britain is
don't
not
know.
European is like saying Japan is not Asian. It is the same thing. Yeah, that's kind of. I never heard that the Brits don't identify as European, but that's what he said. He's a Brit. I have to take his word
The whole
for it.
Brexit
Yeah.
situation. Guys, of course, let us know your thoughts. If you could like, comment, and subscribe. Join the Discord. And as always, share as much kindness as possible.